She sold the only thing she had left in this world, not for rent, not for medicine, but for food. And the man standing behind her in that pawn shop, he was worth $3 billion. But what he did next had nothing to do with money. This is one of those stories that makes you stop and think about every person you've ever walked past without looking twice. A woman named Clara had been fighting alone for 2 years. Her husband left when their daughter Mia was just 18 months old. No goodbye, no money, no explanation. Just an empty side of the bed one morning and a note that said, "I'm sorry, I can't do this." Clara worked 2 jobs. A morning shift at a laundromat and evenings cleaning office buildings downtown. She was exhausted every single day, but she kept going because Mia needed her to. Then the laundromat closed down. Just like that, a sign on the door one Tuesday morning. Clara stood there in the cold, reading it 3 times like maybe she misunderstood. She didn't. Within 6 weeks, her savings were gone. She fell behind on rent. Her evening cleaning job barely covered half her bills. She started skipping meals so Mia could eat. She'd sit at the kitchen table pretending to eat so her daughter wouldn't worry, moving food around an empty plate. One morning, Mia woke up and asked for pancakes. Simple request. 4-year-old kid wants pancakes. Clara opened the fridge and there was nothing. Not even eggs. She had $11 in her account, and the next paycheck was 4 days away. That's when she looked at the small velvet box sitting on her dresser. Her mother's ring. A thin gold band with a tiny diamond in the center. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, but her mother had worn it every single day until she passed, and Clara had kept it close ever since. It was the last piece of her mother she had left. She held it for a long time. Then she put it in her pocket, took Mia's hand, and walked to the pawn shop 3 blocks away. That's when she looked at the small velvet box sitting on her dresser. Her mother's ring. A thin gold band with a tiny diamond in the center. Nothing flashy, nothing expensive, but her mother had worn it every single day until she passed, and Clara had kept it close ever since. It was the last piece of her mother she had left. She held it for a long time. Then she put it in her pocket, took Mia's hand, and walked to the pawn shop 3 blocks away. The man behind the counter looked at the ring for maybe 5 seconds, offered her $40. Clara didn't negotiate. She just nodded. She was filling out the paperwork when a man walked into the shop. Tall, quietly dressed, nothing about him screamed money. His name was Daniel. He ran a logistics company he'd built from nothing over 20 years, worth more than most people will ever count. But he came into that pawn shop that day for the same reason anyone does. He saw something in the window he liked. He stood to the side waiting his turn and he watched Clara. He saw her hands shaking slightly as she signed the form. He saw the little girl, beside her holding a stuffed rabbit and looking up at her, mom with complete trust in her eyes. He saw Clara glance at the ring one last time before sliding it across the counter. He didn't say anything right away. He waited until she stepped back and then he spoke quietly. "Excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. But was that ring important to you?" Clara looked at him like it was a strange question. Of course it was. But she just said, "It was my mother's." Daniel nodded slowly. He looked at the man behind the counter and said, "I'll buy it back. Whatever the number is, I'll pay it." The shop owner looked between both of them. Clara shook her head immediately and said she couldn't accept that from a stranger. Daniel said, "You're not accepting anything. I'm just buying a ring. What you do after that is your business." He paid $200 for a ring the shop had just valued at $40. He handed it to Clara without ceremony. No big speech, no expecting a reaction. He just gave it back to her and turned to look at the display case like nothing happened. Clara stood there holding the ring. Mia tugged her sleeve and whispered, "Is that your mommy's ring again?" And that was the moment Daniel turned back around. He crouched down to Mia's level, asked her what her name was. She told him. He asked about the stuffed rabbit. Its name was Biscuit, apparently. Very important detail. Mia told him Biscuit was 4 years old, same as her, and they were best friends. Daniel laughed. A real one. He stood up and asked Clara if she'd be willing to let him buy them both breakfast. Not in a weird way. In the way someone asks when they genuinely just want to do something good and don't know how else to say it. Clara almost said no. She said later that her first instinct was to say no, because that's what years of doing everything alone does to a person. You stop letting people in because you're used to being let down. But Mia looked up at her with those enormous eyes, and Clara said yes. They walked to a diner down the street. Mia got her pancakes. Daniel got coffee. Clara barely ate at first, still not sure what this was. But Daniel just talked. He asked about her job situation, not in a nosy way, in the way people talk when they're actually listening. Clara found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone. About the laundromat closing, about skipping meals, about how tired she was, but not just physically, but the kind of tired that lives in your chest. He listened to everything. And then he said something that she didn't expect. He said, "I almost shut down my first business twice. The second time I had $40 in my account. I remember exactly how that felt. That was it. He didn't tell her what to do. He didn't give a lecture. He just said, "I've been close to where you are." And it changes things when someone says that. By the end of breakfast, Daniel had offered Clara a position at his company. Not out of pity. He was genuinely short-staffed in his operations coordination team, and he'd spent that hour realizing she was smart, organized, and had been quietly managing a logistical nightmare. Her own life, with no resources and no support. He told her the salary. She thought she'd misheard him. She asked him to repeat it. She cried. Right there in the diner, Mia patted her hand and told her not to be sad. Clara started the job the following Monday. Within a year, she was leading a team of 6 people. She moved into a better apartment. Mia started at a good school. Biscuit the rabbit is still very much part of the family. And the ring? It never left her finger again. Here's the thing that stays with me about this story. Daniel didn't change Clara's life because he was a billionaire. He changed it because he paid attention. Because he saw a woman in a pawn shop and instead of looking away, he looked closer. Most of us walk past people like Clara every single day. People who are one bad week away from selling the last thing they love. People who are moving a fork around an empty plate so their kids don't see them fall apart. It doesn't take $1 billion to stop and see someone. It just takes a second. That ring sat on Clara's mother's hand through decades of hard days. Now it sits on Clara's hand through hers. And one day it'll probably sit on Mia's. Some things are worth more than $40. And sometimes the right person walks in at exactly the right moment.